The WNBA and all the people that follow the WNBA and try to promote the WNBA don't understand that Caitlin Clark's game resonates with us. I say this every day, and every day I got to deal with somebody else dumb in the media. Caitlin Clark's game resonates because she's got flair, she's got flash, she's got style. I said this before, and I'll say this again. We saw Sue Bird's game. We saw Diana Taurasi's game. Kim Mulkey was Sue Bird before Sue Bird became Sue Bird. We've seen it. We haven't seen Caitlin Clark. The folks that cover the NBA, these people that play in the NBA, these people that cover the NBA, there, I said these people, all of you, black, white, green, purple. Why don't you understand a very simple thing? Her game is dynamic. Like Diana Taurasi was like a jackass to Caitlin Clark. Why? Her game is what people are drawn to. And then you go to the personality. Her game is different than any WNBA woman ever.
They will claim that Caitlin Clark's season ended before it had a chance to really take off due to an accident, a strange play, or a sad turn of events. However, if you have been keeping an eye on the games, the headlines, and the quiet emanating from the commissioner's office, you are aware that this was anything from an accident. It took months to create this slow-motion catastrophe. And Cathy Engelbert's name is at the very core of everything. Consider it. The star of the WNBA. Piece by piece, game after game, the most significant player in the league's history gets sidelined. And those in control want you to think it was simply poor luck. However, such narrative doesn't make sense. The ongoing targeting is not explained by it. The disregarded fouls are not explained by it. The meticulously constructed news releases that skirted the truth are not explained by it. It also doesn't explain why players and supporters only received polished PR spin in response to their pleas for responsibility. The truth is more sinister. What you are about to hear is not conjecture. It's a trail of proof. Public data, obvious trends, and business declarations all suggest the same thing. The WNBA commissioner led Caitlin Clark to the slaughter while also celebrating her. They don't want you to know this tale. The narrative transcends highlight clips and ticket sales to include boardrooms, hushed discussions, and choices made for cold, hard cash rather than passion for the game. Because Clark's injury is fundamentally more than simply a superstar being out. It has to do with treachery. The league's future as well as Caitlin Clark's career are at risk due to this enormous and calculated treachery. This is the bit that should keep you up at night. This is no longer only an allegation. Engelbert's own behavior, her silence, her inconsistencies, and even the words she wrote serve as confessions. It wasn't the kind of confession you would anticipate, an apology and a pledge to improve, but rather the kind that only those in positions of authority can make, by remaining silent and concentrating on profits while supporters watched their hero fall apart. The tale we're about to reveal is considerably worse than any random event, so stick with me. The joy, the treachery, the falsehoods, and ultimately the collapse will all be covered. By the conclusion, you'll discover how one commissioner's fixation with expansion and financial gain directly contributed to the demise of her league's golden goose. It begins with the festivities and concludes with a betrayal so profound that fans are now questioning if it was due to ineptitude or something much deeper. There was rejoicing prior to the treachery, injuries, and cover-ups. You must first perceive the setting that was prepared in order to comprehend how deeply the knife would ultimately twist. Because the WNBA wasn't just expanding in early 2025. It was blowing up. Caitlin Clark was the one person at the heart of it all. The league has been dreaming of a moment like this for years. Corporate sponsors waiting in line to write checks, crowded venues, and national media attention. And it wasn't the result of a creative campaign or a marketing strategy. One 23-year-old superstar was altering the game just by on the court, which is why it was taking place. The Clark impact was more than a headline. It was actual cash. 1,000-person events were now too large for their locations. Teams were rushing to meet the demand, shifting games into enormous NDA venues. 6 teams were forced to move their home games. And each and every one of those evenings generated additional income of hundreds of thousands. More than $400,000 each game, according to some estimates. It's not a bump. It's a revolution. And who was there at every picture opportunity, ribbon cutting, and press conference. Commissioner Cathy Engelbert told everyone who would listen that the league had reached its golden age while grinning for the cameras and shaking hands with business partners. She spoke about unprecedented sponsorship agreements, soaring item sales, and the most promising future in women's sports history as she stood on stages. However, when the shiny PR is removed, the reality becomes clear. Without Caitlin Clark, none of this would have happened. She was more than simply the standout player. She was the backbone of the WNBA economy as a whole. Engelbert was aware of it. She was aware that Clark's name was associated with every broadcast, headline, and ticket sold. At that time, she was more than simply commissioner. The Clark effect's main benefit was her. The celebration of her leadership, the flattering interviews, and the victory laps were all constructed on the shoulders of a rookie who had only been in the game for a year. However, here is when everything started to go wrong. Because something else was going on when Engelbert was grinning for the cameras and taking advantage of the goodwill. Fans who really watched the games could see this. It wasn't simply rough play on Clark. They were pursuing her. Additionally, the commissioner disregarded the warning flags while parading about in celebration of development. The party, which Engelbert presented as her greatest accomplishment, was unstable. Everyone knew in their hearts that it wouldn't last. Because what happens if you construct your empire around a single star and then neglect to keep her safe? The festivities come to an end there, and the treachery starts. The tale takes its first sinister turn at this point. Because something even more repulsive was taking on under the bright lights of WNBA arenas while the commissioner was up front celebrating record profits and grinning for the cameras. It wasn't simply basketball that Caitlin Clark was doing. They were pursuing her. The stats from her debut season were indisputable. A startling 20% of all flagrant fouls in the league were absorbed by Clark. Consider that. The 15th most brutal foul in professional basketball was committed by a single player. It's not a competition. It's a campaign. It wasn't subtle either. Fans saw it. It was criticized by commentators. Every game appeared to bring another elbow, another cheap shot, and another guy trying to make a point. One of the primary offenders was Angel Ree of the Chicago Sky, who delivered hit after hit while giggling about it. Laughing as the officials swallowed their whistles and Clark picked herself up off the parquet. These weren't only severe playoff infractions. The defense wasn't very strong. They were private. They were over the top. And they were unrelenting. You would refer to it as assault in any other employment. However, it was dismissed as a normal aspect of the game inside the WNBA. Ree was not the end of the targeting. Sophie Cunningham, a difficult teammate of Clark's, had to fill in by the next season. She was among the league's top players for flagrant fouls sustained after already taking her fair share of blows. However, she reached her breaking point after seeing Clark get intoxicated every night. Cunningham essentially threatened referees on the court, saying she would have to deal with the commotion personally if they failed to fulfill their duties. Just picture that. A player pleading with authorities to uphold the regulations since the league administration had entirely neglected its duty to safeguard its brightest star. What action did Engelbert take? Nothing. Quiet. Not a single significant change. Not a single league-wide effort to safeguard women's basketball's reputation. Rather, she allowed it to unfold. Allow Clark to absorb the blows. Allow him to fabricate a story to hide the truth. A methodical effort to physically and psychologically destroy her. Even the national press was unable to overlook the obvious targeting. The WNBA officiating itself has become a threat to the game, according to headlines in the Washington Post. Fans took to social media to call it what it was. A league-approved penalty for being too well-liked, too powerful, and too large for the system to manage. Inside the commissioner's office, however, there is quiet, no apologies, no accountability, just more happy pictures, income statistics, and boasts of record-breaking ticket sales. And because Engelbert had an option, his silence and inaction constituted the first and maybe most unacceptable betrayal. She could defend the player who was leading her league to new heights on her own, or she could defend the flawed structure that made it possible for Clark to be singled out. The system was her choice. There was no turning back once she made that decision. In addition to harming Clark's physique, the abuse caused a series of ailments that would eventually ruin her season. At that point, the tale shifts from carelessness to catastrophe. By now, there was no secret plot behind Caitlin Clark's targeting. It was clear. Every game, fans saw it. Players on the other side acknowledged it. On live television, analysts dissected it. Even well-known publications, such as the Washington Post, began to write scathing articles on how WNBA officiating had directly jeopardized the sport's legitimacy. There was proof everywhere. What was the league's reaction? With responsibility, with change, and with a pledge to at last defend the player who was supporting their whole financial system? No. Gaslighting was the league's response. Tough questions regarding why Clark was enduring vicious blows without raising an alarm were posed by reporters. The commissioner's office relied on well-crafted corporate speak responses rather than facing reality. The type of PR gibberish intended to write off players and supporters as too dramatic. Let's take a moment to consider the most popular statement: "No one's ever happy with officiating. We're working hard. Every night, a generational talent is being pursued. The fans are furious. Referees are being explicitly warned by players." Well, nobody likes the refs. Is Engelbert's big retort, but it's not an answer. It's offensive. This became the league's official strategy under Engelbert, which is the same as telling millions of paying fans, "You're crazy. You're imagining things. Just keep buying tickets and stop asking questions." Deny, divert, minimize. Refuse to recognize the targeting. Don't acknowledge your errors. Don't make anybody answerable. Instead, speak in ambiguous terms, discuss conversation and advancements, and conceal the true problem behind layers of public relations gloss. This is the darkest part. For a time, the gaslighting was effective. Critics may be accused of being too emotional because of the persistent corporate spin, which produced just enough uncertainty and mist. It gave Engelbert more time. Time to continue tallying the cash as Clark's body continued to sustain injuries. However, denial doesn't make reality go away. The fouls continued unabated. The wounds did not go away. The commissioner's statement that "we're working on it" did not suddenly put a stop to the targeting. Millions of fans could witness the facts every night. Furthermore, it became increasingly clear that the league wasn't just ignoring its hero the longer Engelbert remained silent. It participated in her demise. It wasn't simply poor leadership. It was professionalism masquerading as treachery. While her league's most valuable player was being physically demolished in front of you, a cheerful commissioner assured you that everything was okay. Furthermore, as everyone knows, an issue won't go away if it is ignored. It is made worse by the fact that what began as cheap shots and uncalled fouls swiftly escalated into something far more destructive. Everyone anticipated the season-ending injury, but no one in authority made an effort to stop it. Caitlin Clark's 2025 season doesn't appear like a typical injury report. It reads like a train catastrophe in slow motion. Everyone saw it coming, but no one in authority made an effort to stop it. It wasn't unlucky. This was not an unusual mishap. It was an obvious and clear consequence of negligence. It began modestly. A quad strain in May 2025. It was a small setback, but manageable, they added. However, a quad strain is the type of condition that screams overuse, as anybody who has watched sports long enough will know. Clark wasn't receiving any protection or time to recuperate in between games. Her body was already beginning to fail, and she was taking hits every night. The following phase was recurring groin injuries. June, July, and so on. Injuries that don't occur in a vacuum. They occur as the body adjusts. When the burden shifts from one weak place to another. It had a cascading impact. And each domino was falling just how it was supposed to. By August, the injury had worsened and resulted in a bone bruise. That is not the kind of damage that occurs suddenly. This kind of damage occurs when the body has been subjected to months of physical abuse and is required to work under such conditions without enough recuperation. Then the pivotal moment arrived, the news that no fan wanted to hear but was secretly anticipated. For the rest of the 2025 season, Caitlin Clark remained sidelined. Consider that. After only 13 games, a two-time All-Star, the 2024 Rookie of the Year, and the most important player in the league's expansion history was gone. Her body was methodically destroyed over months of abuse and neglect, not because of a single unfortunate accident. This was not a terrifying tale of happenstance. It was a failed timeline. Every blow built upon the previous one. She got closer to the inevitable with every foul that was disregarded and uncalled. It was visible to fans. The players sensed it. It was already being covered by reporters. However, the commissioner, who had the authority to take action, remained mute. And it's the quiet that transforms this from sorrow to treachery. Because it wasn't necessary for this to occur. Caitlin Clark's season may have been very different with true officiating reform and athlete protection. Rather, the golden goose of the WNBA was left defenseless and battered until her body failed. However, the narrative doesn't end there since Engelbert's second betrayal was much more cynical than her first, which included ignoring the abuse. The league didn't simply remain quiet after Clark was hurt. Fans who paid for tickets, saw broadcasts, and thought Clark may yet return were blatantly misled by them. At that point, the tale shifts from carelessness to open dishonesty. If Engelbert's silence throughout Caitlin Clark's targeting on the court constituted the first betrayal, then the second betrayal was far more deliberate and intimate. Because the league wasn't just giving up on its top player this time. It was a flagrant lie to the fans, who were the WNBA's lifeblood. This is what took place. Clark was labeled as day-to-day for over 8 weeks. Her name appeared on the injury report for each game. She was rated as likely at times, dubious at others, and game time at other times. Fans clung to hope each time. Perhaps it would be tonight. Perhaps this would be her return. Here's the reality, however. Insiders were aware that she would not return. The wounds weren't little setbacks. They weren't a burden that only required some relaxation. It was stated clearly by medical experts who saw the chronology. All along, this was a season-ending circumstance. Nevertheless, the WNBA and the Indiana Fever kept up the farce week after week, giving fans updates they knew were untrue. And why? Money, in one word. Fans continued to purchase tickets as long as Clark was performing on a daily basis. To witness the celebrity who had inspired them to love the game, parents traveled hundreds of miles across the nation with their children. TV ratings were kept high by broadcasters who exaggerated her possible pregnancy. Because hope is a potent commodity, merchandise sales remained strong. League executives, however, understood it was all smoke and mirrors behind the curtain. It was best expressed by a medical expert. They may have said that it would be assessed in 6 weeks after 2 months. Rather, they spent 8 weeks playing this routine game. It wasn't hope. It wasn't a warning. That was dishonesty. It wasn't harmless either. Fans fell victim to fraud. To watch Clark play, whole families purchased tickets to road games, only to learn that she would never on the court. They invested their time, money, and faith in a dream that the league had already dismissed. The treachery was no longer limited to Clark's wound. It was about controlling the exact individuals who had first created the WNBA's momentum. This was the second major setback for Engelbert. She had not only led her league to benefit from a false optimism, but she had also allowed its face to be pummeled into harm. Even when Clark's season was almost finished, she used her name and reputation as a marketing weapon, keeping the truth from the people who deserved to know the truth. The harm was not only physical but also psychological when the deceit eventually came to an end and it was announced that Caitlin Clark was done for the season. Supporters felt duped. The league's legitimacy, which Engelbert had spent years promoting, collapsed along with trust, which vanished immediately. Even so, the commissioner still had an opportunity to turn things around, accept responsibility for her league's shortcomings, face up to her errors, and show a genuine commitment to reform. But the most incriminating thing of all was perhaps what transpired afterward. Because Engelbert made the one comment that reaffirmed her priorities throughout, rather than accepting accountability. All eyes were on Commissioner Cathy Engelbert when the truth eventually emerged, and it was clear that Caitlin Clark's season was ended. This was her chance to take charge, own up to her faults, accept responsibility, and assure players and supporters that significant change was on the way. However, Engelbert issued a polished business statement rather than confronting officiating shortcomings or admitting the falsehoods surrounding Clark's injury chronology. Just discuss growth, income sources, and productive discourse. No apology, no responsibility. Her admission was included in her silence and unwillingness to discuss the true problem. She didn't have to say it out. Engelbert made clear what was most important to her by concentrating on business when the brightest star in her league was shattered. Not the money, not the players, and not the fans. That was her admission, and it provided all the information we needed. The WNBA house of cards fell apart as soon as Caitlin Clark was declared out for the season. Commissioner Engelbert's portrayal of the league's golden age was quickly shown to be nothing more than a precarious empire supported on a single player. And the numbers were a nightmare without her. Major game ticket prices plummeted overnight. The biggest decline occurred over the NBA All-Star Weekend, when resale prices dropped by about 50% as soon as Clark's departure was announced. After losing its star power, what had been a popular game suddenly became simply another one, and its television ratings did not improve. In Clark's absence, national broadcasts that had previously reached all-time highs fell by more than 50%. The broadcasters who had been profiting from the Clark effect were forced to scramble and fill airtime with meaningless analysis and justifications. Additionally, marketers began asking difficult questions in private. If the WNBA is unable to retain its greatest star on the court, what will happen to their investment? Even the sports media, which had for years carefully applauded Engelbert's purported leadership, turned on the league. The silent section was spoken aloud by Cologne Cowherd, one of the biggest voices in American athletics. When Caitlin Clark isn't playing, the WNBA isn't discussed. The story changed almost instantly. The league's rise was not sustainable. Engelbert had let the lone performer in the concert to fall apart. However, it wasn't the figures that caused the actual collapse. The fans were the source of it. They felt deceived since they were the ones who purchased tickets on a weekly basis, watched games in record numbers, and stood up for Clark against every cheap shot and foul. Furthermore, treachery is more painful than disappointment. Anger was prevalent on social media. Refunds for away games when Clark was mistakenly labeled as day-to-day were sought by fans. Boycotts began to gather momentum, with whole organizations promising to ruin playoff ratings as a form of protest. Furious that the league had deliberately misled them, parents who had brought their children to see Clark play came out. Furthermore, trust is difficult to regain after it has been lost. Not only was the WNBA losing its greatest star, it was in danger of losing the tenuous relationship it had established with the general people. The league has been pleading for recognition and attention for years. In only one season, Caitlin Clark delivered it. However, the league lost something far more significant when it prioritized money and dishonesty above integrity and security. Legitimacy. And in that void, with ticket prices down, ratings plummeting, and fans furious, a deeper question started to emerge. With every week that went by, a question that had been whispered among insiders became louder. A question that transforms this tale from one of neglect into something far worse. The facts are indisputable by now. The objective was Caitlin Clark. On the court, she was beaten. She was duped by it. Fans were tricked. There was financial pressure. And the commissioner only offered corporate spending and quiet when everything fell apart. Carelessness, obviously betrayal. But what if it wasn't only carelessness? What if it wasn't only a failure? What if it was something more sinister? Behind the scenes, murmurs are posing this question, which is too unsettling to ignore. Was this whole event a deliberate choice rather than just the product of incompetence? A decision taken at the highest level to humble the greatest star in the league. Consider it. Caitlin Clark achieved more for the WNBA in 4 weeks than Cathy Engelbert did in 4 years. Ticket sales, broadcast agreements, national discussion. All of a sudden, the commissioner's office no longer held the balance of power in women's basketball. It was in the possession of a 23-year-old footballer whose name had the power to influence markets. And that type of power transfer was risky for someone like Engelbert, who had established her name by steering the league into a new age. Clark was more than simply the WNBA's public face. She was becoming larger than both Engelbert and the league itself. Furthermore, history demonstrates that institutions seldom allow people to outgrow them without resistance. This is the terrifying prospect. Was Clark's treatment on the court just an example of ineptitude being accepted? Or was it encouraged? Did Engelbert and her inner circle see the increasing number of injuries and the many cheap shots as a means of controlling their star? A means of reminding her and the supporters who is in charge of the league. We are unable to confirm that. Not quite yet. However, the murmurs are becoming more audible. Players' close associates are beginning to speak. Insiders are implying that the absence of protection was policy rather than simply carelessness. Not only were authorities incompetent, but they were also instructed to allow them to play at any costs. Caitlin Clark was the price. Her physique, her season, her confidence. Possibly even the confidence of millions of fans. This isn't only the tale of a celebrity deceived, if that is accurate. It tells the tale of a league that purposefully ended its own heyday before it had started. It was done on purpose, not by accident or error. Although we don't yet have the whole solution, the truth will eventually be revealed. When it happens, it will reveal more than simply what transpired with Caitlin Clark. The WNBA itself will be exposed.